Hi, so I'm going to make a video based on an article from a series of articles that's really was helpful for me. The series is from Psychology Today and it's called A Hunger Artist. And this particular article is subtitled Starvation Study Shows that Recovery from Anorexia is Possible Only by Gaining Weight. I think this is a really neat article for us to look at because it captures a lot of things that we see when people lose and gain weight in the bodybuilding or fitness world. So it starts out by discussing the Minnesota starvation experiment. I really recommend that anyone with interest in losing weight, cutting calories, read this study. It was conducted during World War II. And there were people in the concentration camps who obviously weren't getting enough food, and they wanted to understand the effects of starvation and then the effects of refeeding so that they could properly help them get better nutrition when the war was over. So, what they did is they took some men who volunteered for the study and they fed them what they considered a starvation amount of food. That was about 1,560 calories. So let me just read some of the things that they described these men as experiencing. After 6 months, they experienced hysteria and depression, self-mutilation and hypochondria, and developed eating disorder-like symptoms such as preoccupation with food, reduction in sexual interest, social withdrawal or irritability and anger, and pleasure in watching others eat, hoarding food, lack of concentration, and then they had edema, like water retention in their legs. So I thought this was good to see that some people develop problems just from having low calories. There isn't necessarily anything more complex than that going on. Or for some folks, when their calories get cut pretty low, they can start to actually have an underlying eating disorder come out. So for other people, there may have been something else that doesn't really get better until they start to gain weight. I know some people might be surprised 1,560 calories. That's what a lot of diets prescribe. And I think that's exactly what we're concerned about. That isn't really necessarily a healthy level for most people. I believe the World Health Organization's semi-starvation or starvation guidelines for women is 1,850 calories. And so that's the level where people would start to need help getting more food than that to be healthy. And there's really an issue the fact that these men, their food was monitored and it was for months in a row. I think some people maybe go on diets in the short term, and so they think that amount of calories is really okay. But now that so many folks are actually tracking or keeping MyFitnessPal or things like that, and their calorie levels like this, and then they start having mood symptoms or other problems, this study shows us that actually that's quite in line with what the scientists have found. So after the study, partly why they did it was to see how the refeeding goes. And I know a lot of folks who've come out of restrictive diets feel like they end up developing a binge eating disorder. They might use that term, not necessarily with a professional diagnosing it. So I wanted to read what they say here happened to the men during refeeding. During the refeeding stage, the men, quote, lost control of their appetites and more or less ate continuously. They reported feeling self-deprecation, disgust, and self-criticism for this. Within 8 months, most of them had normalized their eating again, and most participants gained higher than their previous weight, but gradually declined towards pre-experiment levels. So first, to talk about the amount that they were eating on, they also weren't deadlifting or sprinting or a lot of the things that we do. They weren't necessarily running around taking care of children or working at the kinds of jobs that we were. And so here they are on just that amount, and when they get the chance to eat freely again, they end up eating tons of food. I think there was one guy who was carrying candy bars in his pocket all the time. They just wanted to eat and eat and eat. And so this actually shows us that this is kind of a normal response to having been underfed for a while. And I think a lot of people do this on their own. So they're either done with a prep or they're just done with a diet, and then they start eating. And then it's like the floodgates open and they eat and eat and eat, and they start to think there's something wrong with themselves. Actually, just like these men did, what we're actually seeing is maybe that's kind of a normal thing. Maybe there's nothing necessarily wrong with them. And then to also see, without any interventions, without any coaches, these men gain more than their initial weight. It's called that overshooting. It's really common in recovery from eating disorders. It can be a really scary process, and it's where you might weigh more than you ever did before. That absolutely happened to me. Um, I've never weighed this much in my life, but it was just part of my recovery. I actually got congratulated many times for being pregnant, which I'm not, just because I gained so much weight so fast. And I think it was a little maybe easier for me because I had a dietitian who specializes in eating disorders. And so she was able to reassure me. And when some people were really concerned, I was able to explain to them I am working with someone who kind of knows what to do. And that was reassuring to them. But I think if someone were doing this on their own, they might not have that reassurance, and they might look at things online and think they've now developed a new eating disorder because they're so hungry all the time. But it's not really a disorder if it's fitting what we see is a normal response to the conditions that they were in with their food. So then you overshoot to a higher weight than you ever were before. And actually, these men within 8 months were kind of back to normal. And that's what happens if you just let the process ride out. If you don't start another diet that's restrictive and then you come off of that one and you eat too much and you overshoot again. And that's a real vicious cycle. But if you just kind of let it happen, you let yourself eat. These men were eating thousands, several thousands of calories a day. And then they just kind of went up, and then it kind of just slowly came back down, and they went back to their own healthy weight. And that's what a lot of us can do. Now, the thing is some of us, our healthy weight is higher than we wish it was. But that's a whole different story. So part of what this article is saying is that we don't really start to cognitively, mentally understand that there's a problem until we get enough body fat, until our weight actually gets high enough. Some of that has to do with our mental functioning, some actually issues with the brain and neurotransmitters and how nerves are working when our body fat is too low. That's actually compromised. So I'm going to read what she says in this article. We don't see the need for more food or register that there is a problem until gaining enough weight. Now, this article identifies the BMI of 19 is that weight where people start to kind of really realize that there's an issue and that they do need to eat. I'm confident that that weight is higher for athletes, especially because we've done so much to preserve our muscle bellies, the weight of that themselves, but there can still be really significant damage to our nerves, our brains, our organs, especially our heart and the electrolyte and hydration systems in the body. Those can be all out of whack. And that's why it can be so dangerous during that initial refeeding. I know we talk a lot about the importance of talking to doctors, getting electrolytes checked, looking for signs of refeeding syndrome, because those electrolytes, which control the functioning of the heart and our whole body, are changing when people start taking in more food. So the idea is that until you kind of gain enough weight, you don't necessarily know why you need to gain weight or feel the need to gain weight. I definitely saw that myself. I was really, really lean, and I didn't see anything wrong with that. And there were all kinds of warning signs, and they didn't really register until I gained a significant amount of weight. And then I started to see, like, oh my gosh, wow, I really needed this. I needed some food. So I'm going to read one more thing that she says here, which is it's really the effect of starvation itself. And looking at the study to remember starvation can be diets, pretty close to 2,000 calories. But that if we keep those up, and that can be a starved state. She says your starved state is the thing that made you believe you were nothing but your anorexia. It is making the smallest piece of food feel like too much. Recovery from anorexia is not easy, but it is simple. All you need to do is eat. and eat and keep eating and sometimes allow an overshoot. I've seen actually a lot of bodybuilders inside and outside this group have an overshoot. Something around 40 pounds is actually kind of average. Um, People will just say, I didn't eat much and I gained 40 pounds. People will say, I just ate and ate and ate and I gained 40 pounds, maybe more. But that kind of makes sense if you think about it. Maybe, say someone in contest shape is 20, maybe 30 pounds under kind of what might be a physiologically optimal weight for themselves. And then that builds in a little bit of overshoot. And so that weight gain, while it sounds really kind of extreme, oh my gosh, I gained 40 pounds, actually really fits what we see as a normal process here. Um, Not even for people with eating disorders, but just for people who weren't eating enough for a good amount of time. So I would really like to learn more about this process. I think we need to study it more because people are going through it on their own. They can be really afraid or think there's something wrong with them. And we're starting to see maybe there isn't something wrong with them. Maybe this is just a normal response to some systems that we've built up in our fitness community. And I don't think that's exclusive to bodybuilding at all. Any health magazine, the diets that are in there, these are really typical levels for that. So I'd be glad to get some feedback and figure out how we can help people kind of ride this process through, instead of, really feeling afraid of what are some pretty strong responses within ourselves. Thanks, guys.